He underestimated her, believing she was powerless, but he had no idea her husband carried a past that would turn everything upside down. What followed gripped the entire nation, all unfolding in the vibrant streets of Atlanta, Georgia, a city where resilience meets culture and hustle is a way of life. At the center of this unfolding drama was Tamara Jenkins, a soft-spoken but fiercely independent black woman expecting her first child, and her husband, Marcus Jenkins, a calm and composed man with a history that would become a pivotal force in an extraordinary turn of events. It was an afternoon like any other, the sun casting a golden glow over the bustling streets of Atlanta. Tamara Jenkins, her hands carefully balancing a small bag of fresh produce, stepped out of the local grocery store. Her mind was on the evening ahead, preparing a warm dinner for her husband Marcus, who worked long shifts at a nearby logistics company. Life wasn't easy, but Tamara took pride in finding joy in the small things. She smiled as she thought of Marcus's tired but grateful face when he walked through the door that evening. The calm of the day shattered as a police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. Officer Dean Miller, a middle-aged white man known in the community for his intimidating demeanor and frequent abuses of power, spotted Tamara. Without hesitation or cause, he slammed on the brakes, his eyes narrowing as he watched her. Miller had built a reputation for targeting residents in predominantly black neighborhoods, his subtle racism and aggressive tactics earning him a fearsome notoriety. For Tamara, a routine trip to the store was about to turn into a nightmare. "Ma'am, stop right there." Miller barked as he swung his car door open, his hand instinctively resting on the weapon holstered at his side. The sudden confrontation startled Tamara, but she turned to face him with a calmness that belied her growing apprehension. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart raced. Miller's scowl deepened, his jaw tightening as he stepped closer. His voice, sharp and filled with misplaced authority, cut through the warm afternoon air. "You're loitering," he snapped, his words an accusation rather than a question. "I don't need troublemakers hanging around here." Tamara's brow knitted in confusion. She glanced down at the grocery bag in her hand, the soft rustle of produce a stark contrast to the tension building around her. "Officer, I'm not loitering," she said carefully, her voice calm yet resolute. "I just finished shopping, and I'm heading home." She held up the bag slightly, as if the tangible proof of her errand might quell his hostility. But her explanation seemed only to fuel his frustration. Miller's face flushed an angry red, and the veins in his neck bulged. His heavy boots crunched against the asphalt as he closed the distance between them, his posture radiating aggression. "I said stop arguing," he barked, his voice escalating into a shout that echoed across the parking lot. Before Tamara could process what was happening, Miller's hand shot out, shoving her backward with a force that made her stagger. She stumbled, her body jolting as she fought to keep her balance. Instinctively, her hand went to her stomach, cradling the precious life growing within her. "Officer, please," she began, her voice quivering with both fear and determination. But her plea was cut short as Miller's rage boiled over. Without warning, he lashed out, his polished boot connecting with her abdomen in a brutal kick. The impact stole the breath from her lungs and sent her crumpling to the ground. A sharp cry escaped her lips as she doubled over, her arms instinctively wrapping around her belly in a desperate attempt to shield her unborn child. Pain radiated through her body, sharp and unrelenting, as her vision blurred with tears. Around her, the world erupted into chaos. Gasps and shouts filled the air as bystanders froze, horrified by what they had just witnessed. A woman nearby screamed, her voice piercing through the commotion. "Oh my God, he kicked her. Someone call 911. Several onlookers fumbled for their phones, the glow of screens reflecting their shock and outrage. Some dialed emergency services, while others recorded the scene, their hands trembling as they captured the appalling act of violence. Tamara lay on the cold asphalt, clutching her stomach as tears streamed down her face. Her breaths came in shallow, uneven gasps, her mind racing with fear for her unborn child. The pain was overwhelming, but a deeper terror gripped her. What if her baby was hurt? Miller, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of his actions, stood over her with a sneer, his chest heaving. The parking lot buzzed with activity as more witnesses gathered, their voices rising in a chorus of disbelief and anger. "Hey, stop him," someone shouted, but Miller didn't flinch. His hand hovered near his holstered weapon, a silent warning to anyone who might dare to intervene. The footage captured by the bystanders would soon become the spark for a nationwide reckoning, but in that moment, the focus was on Tamara, her pain, and the profound injustice she had just endured. "Someone call 911, a woman screamed as others rushed to Tamara's side. Meanwhile, Miller stood over her, his chest heaving, seemingly unbothered by the chaos he had unleashed. Within hours, the footage began circulating online, quickly going viral. Social media exploded with outrage, the hashtags #JusticeForTamara and #EndPoliceViolence trending nationwide. News outlets picked up the story, and the nation's collective attention turned to the horrific attack. At Grady Memorial Hospital, doctors worked tirelessly to ensure Tamara and her unborn child would recover. Marcus, who had been at work when the news broke, rushed to her bedside, his face a mask of anguish and fury. Seeing his wife lying in a hospital bed, her tear-streaked face pale from the ordeal, ignited a fire within him. "Tamara, baby, are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling as he grasped her hand. She nodded weakly but whispered, "Marcus, he kicked me." Her voice broke, and tears welled in her eyes. Marcus's jaw tightened, and his hands clenched into fists. But instead of lashing out, he took a deep breath. "We're going to make him pay," he vowed, his voice low and resolute. What Miller couldn't have anticipated was that Marcus Jenkins was not an ordinary man. Beneath his quiet exterior lay a history that would become his greatest weapon. A former Marine with extensive training in strategy and leadership, Marcus had also built a network of connections within the legal and activist communities. Channeling his rage into action, he called on these allies, mobilizing a force determined to seek justice not only for Tamara but for countless others who had suffered at the hands of police brutality. The next day, Marcus stood outside the hospital, surrounded by reporters and civil rights leaders. Cameras flashed as he addressed the growing crowd. His voice was steady, his words precise. "My wife and unborn child were attacked by someone sworn to protect and serve," he began, his tone heavy with emotion. "We will not rest until justice is served, not just for Tamara, but for every victim of unchecked power and systemic injustice." His words ignited a movement. Protests erupted across Atlanta, drawing thousands to the streets. Crowds gathered outside the precinct where Miller worked, demanding accountability. Meanwhile, Marcus worked tirelessly behind the scenes, gathering evidence and assembling a formidable legal team. 3 days later, Marcus walked into the precinct flanked by attorneys and community leaders. In his hand was a court order demanding Miller's immediate suspension. The officer, caught off guard, sneered as Marcus approached. "You're making a big mistake," Miller spat, attempting to maintain his composure. Marcus met his glare with unwavering calm. "The only mistake," he replied, his voice firm, "was thinking you could get away with this." Marcus met his glare with calm resolve. "The only mistake was thinking you could get away with this." As the case unfolded, shocking revelations about systemic issues within the department came to light. Marcus's strategic brilliance, combined with the collective efforts of a community united against injustice, set the stage for a reckoning that no one could ignore. Details about Miller's dark past began to emerge, revealing a pattern of misconduct. Multiple complaints of excessive force and racial profiling had been quietly dismissed over the years, protected by a system that allowed such behavior to persist. Determined to expose the truth, Marcus and his team worked relentlessly, uncovering evidence that turned the trial into a pivotal moment for police accountability. When Tamara took the stand, her testimony was powerful and heartfelt, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. "I was just trying to go home," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "He didn't see me as a person, only as a threat because of the color of my skin. But I will not let him steal my dignity or my baby's future. The trial concluded with Miller's conviction on charges of assault and misconduct. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and permanently stripped of his badge. The Jenkins family also won a substantial settlement from the city, which they pledged to use for community programs aimed at combating police violence. But this was just the beginning. Marcus's leadership and composure during the ordeal earned him national recognition. He was invited to join a task force dedicated to police reform, using his experience to advocate for systemic change. Meanwhile, Tamara, inspired by her husband's resolve, became a passionate advocate for maternal health and racial justice. Together, they transformed their pain into a mission, proving that resilience and unity can create lasting change. As for Miller, his life would forever bear the consequences of his actions. What he thought was a moment of unchecked power became the catalyst for a reckoning he could never have anticipated. The courtroom was packed as the judge prepared to issue the final sentence. Marcus and Tamara sat hand in hand, their unwavering strength a testament to their journey. Millions across the nation watched as the judge delivered a harsher sentence than anyone expected. Not only would Miller serve 15 years in prison, but he would also forfeit his pension and personal assets to further compensate the Jenkins family. Applause erupted as the verdict was read. Just as the room settled, the doors swung open, and David Holloway, the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, strode in, commanding immediate attention. Holding up a thick folder, he addressed the court. "Your Honor, I must interrupt. New evidence has come to light involving Officer Miller and his department." Holloway's revelations detailed a network of corruption within the Atlanta Police Department, including bribery, falsified reports, and targeted harassment of minority communities, all with Miller at the center. Gasps filled the room as Miller's face turned pale. "Today," Holloway declared, "we're not just holding one man accountable, we're taking the first steps to dismantle a corrupt system." Outside the courthouse, the energy was electric. Protesters cheered and chanted Tamara's and Marcus's names as they emerged to address the crowd. Standing tall, Tamara radiated hope, her baby bump visible beneath her flowing dress. Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady. "This is bigger than us," he said. "Today, we sent a message to those who abuse their power. Change is possible, but it takes all of us to stand together." Suddenly, Tamara clutched Marcus's arm and whispered, "Marcus, I think it's time." Hours later, in the delivery room, Tamara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. As his cries filled the room, Marcus held her hand tightly, tears of joy streaming down their faces. They named their son Justice, a living symbol of the fight they had endured and the brighter future they believed in. News of the birth of Justice Jenkins spread like wildfire across the nation, bringing a wave of celebration and admiration for the family that had endured so much. Social media lit up with photos and videos of the newborn, shared alongside messages of hope and support. The story of Marcus and Tamara Jenkins became a rallying cry for communities everywhere, a symbol of resilience in the face of injustice. Donations poured in for the community programs the couple had started, further solidifying their role as advocates for change. The Jenkins family had become a beacon of hope, not just for those in Atlanta but for families across the country fighting against oppression and systemic inequities. Their story inspired documentaries, essays, and even policy discussions at the highest levels of government. A year later, on a bright spring afternoon, Marcus and Tamara stood on a stage outside the newly constructed Jenkins Center for Justice and Equality. The nonprofit organization was their vision come to life, a hub for police reform advocacy, racial equity education, and community support. Tamara, holding baby Justice in her arms, stepped forward to address the crowd. Her voice carried the weight of their journey but also the hope for what lay ahead. "We turned our pain into purpose," she began, her words resonating deeply with the hundreds gathered before her and the thousands watching the event live-streamed across the nation. "This center isn't just for us, it's for everyone who has felt voiceless, everyone who has endured hardship, and everyone who dreams of a better tomorrow." We're building a brighter future, not just for our son but for everyone's children. The crowd erupted into applause, a thunderous acknowledgement of her strength and determination. Marcus stood beside her, his arm around her waist, a quiet smile on his face as he gazed at his wife and their son. When the cheers subsided, he leaned in to kiss Tamara and gently touched Justice's tiny hand. Together, they had faced unimaginable pain and loss, but their love and determination had transformed their lives and the lives of countless others. They had shown the world that even in the darkest moments, hope could prevail, and justice could be achieved. Meanwhile, in a cold, dimly lit prison cell, Dean Miller sat alone, staring at a small TV mounted on the wall. The news broadcast showed the celebration at the Jenkins Center. He watched as Marcus and Tamara stood united, their strength radiating across the screen. A pang of regret and bitterness twisted inside him, knowing that he would never escape the consequences of his actions. The shadow of his hatred would haunt him for the rest of his life, a stark reminder of the cost of his prejudice. Outside the prison walls, the Jenkins family's legacy continued to grow. For every child who visited the center, for every protester who carried their message forward, and for every policy that changed because of their fight, the world inched closer to a future shaped by hope, equality, and justice. And through it all, the Jenkins family stood as a testament to the power of love, resilience, and an unyielding commitment to what is right.